Bonjour, bon matin et merci beaucoup aux organisateurs. C'est un plaisir pour moi de vous présenter le travail du groupe Going-FWD, Gender Outcomes International Group to further well-being development. Comme vous pouvez voir, notre groupe aussi est multidisciplinaire, multinational. Nous avons le co-investigateur à gauche. I did not know I was speaking French. I was wondering, actually. We've been speaking French before. Well, I'm going to speak Italian. What do you think? Okay. Okay, so this is, I'm from Quebec. I'm from Canada. We're bilingual. Et parfois, vous savez, ça, on l'est vraiment. Okay, alors, I speak English. Okay. So the co-investigators are Colleen Norris, who couldn't be here today. She broke her arm. Valeria is here, Valeri, and Monica Parry, and Carol Claire. And we also have some site principal investigator, Alexandra from Vienna, Carolina from Karolinska, Maria Trini, who's here, and with Anna, one of our early career investigators. So. And then, in fact, speaking of early career investigators, we were really blessed and enriched by having several early career investigators who trained with us. And then, the activity of Going-FWD also, attracted other investigators. And we had a scientific advisory board with Vera, Londa, Carol, and Rachel Dreyer. And one other thing that I say enriched going forward were the patient partner. You see here on the bottom right, we're involved in many of our activities, and I think we really learned from their participation. So the overall objective or overarching aim of this large consortium was to integrate sex and gender dimensions in applied healthcare, to evaluate their impact on clinical cost-sensitive outcome and patient-reported outcomes, PROM, that are related to quality of life. And we focused on non-communicable diseases that are seen below. And to do so, we amassed 30 cohorts that made 30 million people, and then we have about 30 investigators in 5 countries to study these 4 main areas. We have a conceptual framework. And this is it here. And recently we put EDI on top because we wanted to start understanding how this whole EDI movement functions, if you like, in the context of sex and gender. And the bottom line is to attain EDI, you need to consider sex and gender-related factors. So in the middle we have, the pointer that doesn't work. Okay. No? There's no laser pointer, okay. The sex, which have been defined by many of us this week, are the biomedical factors, laboratory markers, traditional risk factors, and the gender-related factors, which include identity. So often people say gender, they mean identity, but on top of that, we need to consider the roles, the relations, and the institutional genders, the policy that make us people in society. And these factors interact to make us develop disease, access to care, and respond also differently to outcome related to disease. So we think that these determinants will affect outcomes, clinical outcomes, patient outcomes, in the various conditions. And in the outcomes, as I said before, the more cost-sensitive, obviously mortality doesn't cost, but in terms of its related care, hospitalization, readmission, disease progression, and the patient-related outcomes that affect their quality of life. So this was our conceptual framework, and we tried to gather the potential data that will allow us to answer these in a more global context. So our main deliverables, we tried to build capacity, I think we did, in the value of sex and gender science and knowledge translation. We tried to improve how we measure gender. we defined the going-forward methodology. We tried to perform big data analysis with innovative analytic tools for comparison across data sets across countries. And there were some challenges with that, which we overcame to some extent. And then, we applied the gender methodologies which we had helped clarify, helped develop to better understand and eventually better prevent and treat non-communicable diseases, but also, as this happened in the midst of COVID, we applied our conceptual framework also to understand COVID-19. So let's go to capacity and knowledge translation. Well, I showed you that we were quite a big group of co-investigators and investigators, quite a big group of students. And then we were quite busy with various knowledge translation activities. We have a website, on social media. We had a Twitter webinar, actually, which was really quite amazing. It's kind of a live Twitter sessions with presentations and questions. We were very fortunate to present on Zoom, most of it, at the international meetings. Our early career investigators were really busy with manuscript publications, 54 of those and 12 in relationship to COVID-19. We were present at several conferences of national and international importance in terms of gender and health, and we were really fortunate to be invited by the CIHR in the Meet the Method series to clarify how you conduct research when you're interested to apply sex and gender. So in terms of measuring gender, so that came about our first, you saw the picture, the first picture of all of us in April at the initiation of Going Forward. We came together to understand each other. We were speaking several languages in terms of sex and gender. And then we actually we had a 3-day workshop where we defined, what was gender. And at the end of the workshop, it was interesting because people wanted to remove the word gender. And I was like, we came here from all over the world, and the result is we're removing the word gender. Because, we use the framework from the Women's Research Health, that kind of defined, gender for the CIHR in terms of, gender roles, relations, and institutional gender identity. And under those, we kind of, made a list, sort of a wish list of the various gender-related factors that we thought, would affect care and outcome in non-communicable diseases. And really the philosophy, like I know I'm famous for, not famous, but anyways, I built this score, and people say, of gender from 0 to 1, the 0 to 100, depending if you're all of these is more associated with being a woman traditionally in your society, and 0 if it's more a man. And it's kind of criticized as being a kind of a diminutive binary view of gender. But at the end of the day, it's made up of all these factors, and if people are interested in one or those factors, if the hypothesis, for example, is that the reason, men die more than women in a certain community is related to the number of hours worked per week, or, how they take care of children and have no time for themselves and all that. These are the factors that you will go and measure in order to explain the association. So we worked really hard on that list at the end of the meeting. And then we had a kind of important paper here that is the incorporation of gender in retrospective studies. And we suggested a kind of a method. First, you based on the hypothesis, the gender variable identification, really identify the outcome of interest, how you're going to measure them, the data structure in each country, and the specific policies in order to possibly merge various data sets, create the final data list, do the harmonization of the data. I'll speak a bit about that. And then finally, the kind of protocol for data analysis, which will incorporate probably, interaction terms and mediation analysis to understand how the gender factors play a role. And then after that, we actually also, one of our early career investigator did the same kind of paper, but for gender analysis in prospective study. So it's the same kind of idea, but you really have to have a hypothesis and go about finding the best instrument, maybe it exists already, to measure exactly what gender factor you want to measure, and then conduct the statistical analysis in a similar way. So these were kind of the methods papers, that anchored our work, and hopefully it's been helpful to other investigators. But we feel it was one of the landmarks. Then, we have all these cohorts that we had access to, and then we worked on how to harmonize those cohorts, because each variable in a cohort may not be measured the same way in another cohort, and if we're going to merge them, we have to have a common variable. So that took quite a bit of time. And then once it was done, then this is one of those situations where there's a little bit of naivety, maybe, on my part. But I thought that all these nice big cohorts that our investigators had access to, they could all come to Montreal. And then after we've done all the data harmonization, we would merge a cohort in one computer, and then we would perform the analyses. And this was a bit of a problem, because there's an issue of data transferability, privacy within and outside countries, which in fact required a little bit of research as to how to do that. And, took some of our time, but allowed us to innovate, in the field of big data science, that's happening now, and, this whole thing about AI, big data have to be merged in order to conduct AI as well. So there's situations where, the data are not transferable. If you want to do a central analysis of pooled data, but not possible. And then you could actually run the analysis in the separate countries, merge the results in a meta-analytic way. Another way is to actually set yourself up to do something that we call federated analysis, where the data is actually analyzed in a cloud, and then it's kind of centrally performed. So we actually, with our collaborators in Vienna, set ourselves up with the servers. We use this software called Data Shield. Our trainees got trained to do that, and we were able actually to perform analysis with merged data through this technique. Just to say that, we're doing going forward, we're looking at the effect of gender across countries. So in order to do the interaction between a gender variable and country, the data has to be merged. There's no other way. So we worked hard to be able to do that, and actually we were able to do it. Another way also that we feel going forward innovated is that in the generation and also evaluation of synthetic data. So synthetic data is basically it is somewhat of a machine learning or algorithm where you replicate source data using these algorithms, and you have finally another data set. So I only have 5 minutes to show you that, in fact, we tested whether our synthetic data was the same as source, and you can see the confidence interval overlap here. And then, this is the data shield. So now we were able to actually merge the various variables. Just to show, we had also some sex-based papers. And just to show you, this is how we actually worked all the time, the conceptual framework. So I just want to show you the example of hypertension. This is data from EHIS, the whole of the Europe and Canada. This is prevalence of hypertension. And if you look on the left overall, you see kind of the color red is the highest prevalence and blue least prevalence. So you see the distribution by country. If you separate by sex, and we also argue that we need to separate by sex, disaggregated by sex, it's still not done enough. That's the first step. Once you see differences, you try to explain them biologically or with gendered factors. But we were very struck by doing that to see the prevalence of hypertension in women in Central Eastern Europe. And then we try to see by merging, what are the gendered factors. So these are our main findings was that there's a significant interaction between SES and countries. It's more evident in Central, East, and Southern countries versus Northern, Western, and Canada. So the impact of socioeconomic status on hypertension is greatest and greater in females than males in those countries. Income, education also has the same pattern. Being divorced or widowed also, and being immigrants. These are kind of interaction between these factors and countries, saying that these factors are more deleterious depending where you live in women for the development of hypertension. And this is the analysis that we did with machine learning in the UK Biobank, just to say that at that time there was no sex disaggregated data, and nobody looked at what other factors that are related to COVID infectivity. And we were very interested to find that for females, you can see that night shift, the environment where you live, number of people in household, income, were the factors that came up first in terms of their association with the, COVID infectivity, whereas in men, they were more, LDL, BMI, health score, things that are more related to health versus for female, things that are more related to gender. And interestingly enough, at least in Canada, the vaccination policy, which was medically based initially, shift to being more like socially based and increase the vaccination rate with that policy. Just to finish is that we also looked globally, and we actually went beyond Europe and Canada. And this is Ruby Dev, one of our postdoc, who is now has a position as a nurse at University of UBC. We're very proud of her. And this is looking at global north and global south in the prevalence of hypertension. And if you look at hypertension and obesity and diabetes, look at these women, 51% have hypertension. Same for men. So in terms of chronic diseases and what's happening there, it's not biology. That's not why they're developing hypertension right now at a young age. So that's the next pandemic, I will call it like that, at least in terms of non-communicable diseases. So what next? So having learned all that, we feel it's time that we tailor solution to measure the unique sex and gender factors of women, men, and gender diverse people. The measurement, is still in progress. Definition is still in progress. And then, there's still work to be done for that. We need to develop sex and gender tools for integration in health policy, clinical practice. I want to develop an app or some kind of point-of-care tool that will enable physicians to consider gendered factors when they start treatment. I need help from that, from the innovation, community. And then we also need to develop outcomes that will allow, improvement of outcomes that take into account gendered factors, be it, social prescribing or relationship with community groups, so that we can decrease the burden of non-communicable diseases. And we need to continue working together. We learned very much from knowing that, gender is not the same depending where you live, and its impact on outcome also is not the same. So we need to have gender, culture, country-specific interventions by knowing which gender factors matter where you live. So I will finish with that. Sorry, I'm late.